to engage in dialogue with Vladimir Putin. Yes. In any case, I observe that there are people who are already speaking with Vladimir Putin. So I think that we as Europeans
and Ukrainians, it is in our interest to find the framework to re-engage this discussion in a proper and formal manner.
Friends turned foes, France and Russia, to talk again? Once close partners, now bitter rivals, Macron and Putin edge towards dialogue. Macron signals talk with Putin. Response comes straight from the Kremlin. The answer to Macron's willingness to re-engage with Putin comes directly from the Kremlin. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told Sputnik that Russian President Vladimir Putin is ready to engage in dialogue with French President Emmanuel Macron. But there is a condition. Peskov made it clear, not a one-way conversation, no moral lectures, no political sermons. Dialogue must be based on mutual respect, and spokesperson said if there is mutual political will, Macron's intentions can be viewed positively, but only if talks focus on understanding each other's positions, not dictating terms. Earlier, Macron stated that it would be useful for Europe to resume dialogue with the Russian president in the coming weeks, to which Peskov said it should not be a dialogue about lecturing each other. It should be a dialogue about understanding each other's positions. Russia and France had once shared a close diplomatic relationship, but that changed on February 24, 2022, the day Moscow invaded Ukraine. Macron broke ranks with Putin, aligned firmly with Kyiv, and emerged as one of Ukraine's strongest European backers. But after years of war and no decisive outcome, Macron is now openly arguing that Europe must talk again.
Got lost while scrolling? Get paid for it. Join Jump Task.
Is now openly arguing that Europe must talk again.
Macron stressed that dialogue should not be ruled out, saying he believes it is in the interest of Europeans and Ukrainians to find the right framework to reopen discussions with Moscow. He added that Europeans must find the means to re-engage, suggesting such talks could take place in the coming weeks.
Once again proved beneficial to engage in dialogue with Vladimir Putin. Yes. In any case, I observe that there are people who are already speaking with Vladimir Putin. So I think that we as Europeans
and Ukrainians, it is in our interest to find the framework to re-engage this discussion in a proper and formal manner. Otherwise, we'd be discussing among ourselves with negotiators who would go alone to talk with the Russians. That's not optimal, so I think we must finish the current session, so to speak. Discussions are scheduled to take place over the next few hours to evaluate the advancements. There is a cycle that is currently in progress. If a robust, lasting peace with all the necessary guarantees can be achieved, that's fantastic, and in any case, we will then sit around the table with everyone. It will therefore be necessary, while continuing to finance, engage, resist, and provide assistance to Ukraine, to also find the ways and means in the coming weeks for Europeans, with proper organization, to re-engage in a comprehensive dialogue with Russia, in full transparency and in association with Ukraine.
The comments came after EU leaders struck a deal on a €90 billion loan for Kyiv, a move Macron described as a major step forward, especially after plans to use frozen Russian assets failed to materialize. Crunch talks in Brussels and in deadlock, and billions for Ukraine now hang in the balance. European leaders have failed to agree on a flagship plan pushed by the European Commission to use frozen Russian assets to fund a massive $140 billion reparations loan for Ukraine. The proposal collapsed after several member states raised serious legal, financial, and political concerns. As an alternative, leaders discussed a smaller $90 billion loan spread over 2 years, backed by the EU budget. But that plan required unanimous approval, and countries including Hungary, Slovakia, and Czech Republic only agreed on one condition: they would not be forced to contribute financially. Belgium's Prime Minister, Bart de Wever, delivered a blunt assessment of why the Russian assets plan failed. He said that once the proposal was re-examined, unanswered questions piled up, warning that pulling at its loose ends caused the entire plan to collapse. Belgium, where much of the frozen Russian money is held, joined other countries in warning that seizing the assets could spook global investors and trigger costly legal battles if Russia sues and wins, and raise serious doubts over international law and risk-sharing. Italy, Belgium, Malta, and Bulgaria urged the EU to explore alternative funding mechanisms. Meanwhile, Hungary and Slovakia reiterated their stance that Europe should prioritize ending the war, not financing more weapons, also pointing to ongoing corruption concerns in Ukraine.
We had very important discussions, as I mentioned this morning when I arrived, concerning the future of Europe, regarding support for Ukraine and our upcoming multi-annual financial framework, the future enlargements of the European Union and the reforms it needs to implement, our relationship also with our main trade partners, as well as the challenges linked to the EU-Mercosur agreement and agriculture.
There are many subjects then for this council meeting. I will try to give you an overview here of the main decisions. First, let's talk about Ukraine.
In the intense diplomatic sequence currently underway, we have reaffirmed our commitment to a just and lasting peace, accompanied by robust security guarantees that respect Europe's interests. And I want to commend the decision taken last week to secure in the long term the immobilization of frozen Russian sovereign assets within the jurisdictions of the European Union. This decision, taken last Friday, allows Europe to retain one of its primary negotiating levers. The key objective of this European Council was to provide clarity to Ukraine, as we discussed this morning with President Zelensky, regarding the financial support that the Union can offer in the short term for 2026 and 2027, and prior to crucial discussions with the International Monetary Fund. After lengthy discussions, we have decided on a loan to Ukraine of 90 billion euros for the next 2 years, based on a European Union loan that will be guaranteed by the European budget. These Eurobonds for Ukraine are a major step forward, giving visibility to our Ukrainian friends and coherence to our support. This solution proved to be the most realistic and viable to ensure that Ukraine has, starting in 2026, the means it needs to finance its war effort.
We have ensured to introduce a robust European preference for our defense industry and for Ukraine's.
Concurrently, the Council has been requested to proceed with the technical analysis regarding the option of a reparations loan, which would be funded by the monetary proceeds derived from the frozen Russian sovereign assets.
While the war in Ukraine continues and diplomatic ties with Russia remain deeply strained, and Macron's remarks signal a potential shift, raising fresh questions about how, when, and under what conditions Europe might once again speak directly with Vladimir Putin. As president has stirred controversy with his words on Russia and Ukraine. Since the war began, Emmanuel Macron has repeatedly argued that dialogue with Moscow must remain open, even as fighting raged on the ground. At multiple moments in the conflict, Macron pushed for diplomatic channels with Russia, insisting that talks were essential to prevent dangerous escalation, but those calls for dialogue came alongside harder rhetoric. At one point, the French leader even floated the idea of sending NATO troops to Ukraine, triggering alarm and sharp reactions across Europe.
These reassurance forces, which were the subject of the Franco-British proposal from several weeks ago, are not intended to be peacekeeping forces. I responded yesterday to one of your colleagues to clearly clarify this point. They are not intended to be forces present on the contact line. They are not intended to be forces that would replace the Ukrainian armies. But these would be forces from a few member states present, because there is no unanimity on this point. Some states don't possess the capability to do it, while others don't have the political context that would permit them to, or the agreement. But these would be forces present in certain strategic locations, pre-identified with the Ukrainians, who would then sign a commitment for sustained support, providing reassurance to the Europeans, and possessing a deterrent character against a potential Russian aggression.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has delivered one of his clearest warnings yet on the future of the Ukraine war. Speaking at Russia's annual defense ministry meeting, Putin signaled that Moscow will not compromise on territory. Even as international efforts to secure a peace deal intensified, Putin said Russia would prefer to resolve the conflict through diplomacy, but made clear that option has limits. If talks fail, he warned, Moscow will pursue what it calls the liberation of historical lands through military force. A direct reference to regions Russia is demanding Ukraine cede Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky responded sharply, warning that Moscow's rhetoric about historical lands could threaten other parts of Europe in the future. Kyiv has insisted that borders cannot be redrawn by force, a position backed by many European leaders. In Washington, President Donald Trump has struck a more optimistic tone. Trump says progress toward peace is closer than ever, holding out hope that negotiations can still succeed despite deep disagreements. For now, Europe remains divided. Ukraine remains short of funds, and one of the EU's boldest financial plans has stalled, with no clear consensus in sight as Russian forces continue to advance at various front lines.